Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So this is YZ144 part 8. Last time we left off on the swing arm. We're going to pick up there today. We're going to do some carburation and we're going to start putting things back on the bike. So with all that being said, let's get going. All right, so before we do anything suspension wise today, we've cleaned the bench off a little bit. And getting the carburetor ready to go into the tank here. This is a Sharper Tech heated ultrasonic cleaner. I start with hot water that I warm up in the house. Hot water works a lot better. It's really cold out here today, so this is going to be a battle. First thing we got to do is just get the rest of this stuff off of the carburetor and the float bowl. You can tell it's kind of crappy. And I'm going to run this through here a lot of times today. Now I've got new hoses, so these are going to come off and go in the garbage. Let's just get this thing stripped down and get it in there. All right, so here's all of our carburetor parts about to take a bath. I've got two sets of jets. This is what was in the bike when I took it apart. This is a set, different pilot, different main from when we got it. They're so dirty I can't read them. I'm going to run everything through there a bunch of times, and I just noticed my float bowl gasket is busted. I hope I ordered another one. So let's get this stuff in there. All right, so with the carburetor parts in the ultrasonic cleaner, we're going to get onto the swing arm. So if you watched my last episode, this is cracked. I went over it, and I hate to say it, but it's effectively junk. I'm going to salvage the adjusters and a couple of the other pieces. And I said last week, you know, I would like to be able to fix this, but I don't know how to weld aluminum. And it's so rough, it just didn't make sense to me. So we're going to salvage that. And I mentioned that I went on eBay last week and I looked around and I saw that, you know, while some parts for these older bikes are ridiculously expensive because they're getting hard to come by, others are not as bad, including swing arms. And I got this one. This is off of a 2001, which makes me a little sentimental because I had a new YZ125 in 2001, which was $4,000 out the door cash back then. This swing arm is magnificent, and I'm going to say, without hesitation, I've been buying parts on eBay for 20 years. This is the cleanest used part I have ever bought. I am really, really impressed with this. Even the bearings don't feel bad. I'm going to replace them, but this thing is just in fantastic shape. So we are going to go ahead and press the new bearings back into the linkage. We'll get these out of here, press some new bearings in, and get that back on the bike. All right, so taking out the seals and the bushings from the new swing arm, piece of cake. And then what I'm going to do before I press these guys out, I'm going to shoot them with a little bit of lube, let it sit for a minute, probably heat this up, and then we'll push them out with my press. All right, so here we are with one side of bearings out of the swing arm. Just heated this up a little bit. I had sprayed some penetrating oil in there, and then if you're going to do this on a press, the way to do it, you know, you find a socket of the right size, use a long extension, support the bottom, and then push them out that way. And these are coming right out, which is nice. I'm expecting the new ones will go back in just as easily. So not a lot to it. Now I've done several of these over the years, all of which in that vise. So I got to tell you, having the press makes it a heck of a lot easier. All right, so we suffered a little from bad camera angle there, but as you can see, we've got the old bearings out. And the bottom line is I take a big 3/4 inch drive socket. I use that as the base to catch the bearing, and then, like we showed a minute ago, socket on a long extension to drive it out. and they come right out of there, and they make what is really a pain in the neck job with a vise just that much easier. So while we're at it, let's just put the new ones in. All right, so the new bearings go in the same way the old ones came out, one at a time. You can put them in the freezer, shrink them a little bit. I'm not going to bother doing that. And really, the differences between putting them in and taking them out, I don't need that big socket because we're not going to drive them all the way through. And you just got to be careful. So with the first one, you got to drive it all the way down until it's flush with that that other kind of outer bearing retainer. So just be careful with that. And then when you drive the new one in, you basically can, the other one in, you can see at what point you have to stop so that you can get the seal in there. And I am going to use some Maxima waterproof grease. I don't use bearing grease here. I use waterproof grease just to keep things working smoothly. All right, so we've got the first side in. One thing I neglected to mention, use your waterproof grease and grease those bearings up before you put them in there. It's going to be a while before you get back at it. And then the other thing that's really important, when you're just getting these bearings started, I use this plate on top of them and then the socket on top of the plate. That allows you to drive it in straight, and I actually leave the plate there until I get the bearing all the way down flush with the surface, and then I press the rest of it with the socket. So we're halfway done. This goes pretty easily. Just take your time. I've learned in using the press for the last couple of weeks, you just have to be careful. You know, it's easy to get things right. It's also easy to get things wrong. All right, so now with both sides of the bearings in, it's a matter of putting in these other bearings and washers. It's interesting. When I took this swing arm apart, the way that these things are stacked, the old way, is washer, bearing, washer. When I took my other swing arm apart, it was washer, washer, bearing. The other swing arm didn't have these bushings on either side. What a mess. So these are supposedly an upgraded kit. In the order you put these together in is washer, this, washer with the yellow side facing out. So we're going to do that, put the seals on both sides, then the swing arm is ready to go. All right, and there we are, all put back together and ready to go on the bike. The inner seals I just pressed in. It's a lot easier. The outer ones you can just push in with your fingers. Grease everything up. Keep the grease off the outside because it's going to attract dirt, and that's it. This is now ready to go. So I'm going to order some of the original Yamaha decals to go on here because I am deep in the rabbit hole. And while I'm at it, I did not get a new float bowl gasket, so I got to get one of those. And then I also noticed that my throttle cable is broken. It works, but that jacket is busted. Ooh, hello, GT750. That jacket is busted right there. So I am going to order one of those as well. And then I'm going to take a look at what the jets are once they're cleaned up. And if I need to order a little bit leaner, I'm going to do that at the same time. Here's something else very satisfying. Yet another pile of parts to just throw away. Here's the pile from the linkage, which we have to put back together in the old swing arm. Also going in the garbage. This bike has a lot of new parts on it. And finally, last thing in the good to know category. When you look at all of this stuff, it's rusty, right? I mean, my swing arm and linkage is worse than the new one, but this stuff is rusty. And why is it rusty? Because, you know, water eventually makes its way in there, especially if you're power washing your bike all the time, and this stuff is going to rust. And for the 99% of us out there that are not pros and don't have a mechanic taking our bike apart after every race, you know, this is what happens. So it's important to do the maintenance, and it's important to replace this stuff over time. All right, so here we are with the linkage bearings, all new and in place and greased up. And some of you guys might say, well, geez, Chris, you know, that stuff is good. Now it's mechanically perfect, but it doesn't look as nice and shiny as some restoration videos. But keep in mind, this is going to be a bike that I ride. This linkage gets filthy, gets beat up. Do I need it to be perfect before I take it out the first time? I need it to be perfect mechanically. It doesn't have to look perfect. I'll clean it up a little bit before it goes back on the bike, but I am not getting nuts with this. All right, and after all of that, here we are with the Swingarm back on the bike. Not completely back on the bike, but got that one bolt in there through the engine, and everything is working nicely. Still got to finish it up, but we're about to call it for the day. All right, guys, so here we are back on the bench, and despite my best efforts, my bench is always a mess. What are we going to do? Well, the carburetor is going to take one more trip through the ultrasonic cleaner, because even after 2 hours in there, hard to see, but some of these passages are still a little bit goopy. I got to run some compressed air through there, and then I'm going to run that again. The jets, after 2 trips through, still look like crap. Stock jetting for the main, I believe, is a 350 on this bike. When we got it, it was leaned out a little bit. 340. I have a set here that's 330 with the matching pilot. Good little tip for anybody with one of these older 2-stroke bikes. Jetting doesn't change magically. If you get a bike and it's jetted stock and it ran fine, right, now you're having problems, chances are it's your top end and not your jetting. So I needed a float bowl gasket, and I said to myself, at $12 and who knows what to actually get one, let me just get a rebuild kit. I've rebuilt this carburetor at least once, but that was years ago now. And the bottom line is, if you run ethanol fuel, and sadly we did for a bit, this is what you're going to end up with. So one more rebuild, like $25 for this kit. No more ethanol gas in here. That's going to make a big difference. Brand new Motion Pro throttle cable. That's going to go on today when we get the carburetor back on there. Yamaha stickers that are going to go on the swing arm and the fork. Yeah, I'm kind of down the rabbit hole here, but you know, this is coming out really nice. I've got new graphics for everywhere else. I guess it's going to be better than I thought. And then finally, you know, we're going to replace this throttle cable. I've got to clean up the slide. We're going to replace the jet needle, and let's just get at it. So another important tip, before I start putting too much of this back together, I paused and I connected the nut in the washer for the swing arm. Same thing down there on the linkage bolt. I torque those to the appropriate spec. I've got Loctite on there. And I always go back and I check the parts diagram to make sure that it not only goes back the way that I took it apart, but that I have all the parts. And long story short, this didn't have the washer on it. The other side had a washer that didn't fit. So luckily I have enough motorcycle parts around that I found washers that are appropriate. I also torqued down the engine bolts, top and bottom, Loctite those as well, and made sure that, again, I've got the right parts in the right places. All right, so here's the carburetor after 3 trips through the ultrasonic cleaner. And it's basically, I run it through there for an hour. I run compressed air through everything. Another hour, more air. Another hour, more air. Passages are clean. Outside is clean. It's a little ugly, but this is what a carburetor looks like after, 25 years. And if this was a showroom restoration and I wasn't going to ride this bike, I'd polish this, but I'm going to ride the bike, and it's going to get dirty. So we're going to leave it the way it is, put it back together, rebuild kit. I did buy a couple of NOS parts because like the little screw that holds down this assembly was stripped, and some of those things you just have to put new ones on. So let's get it back together. And here we are, all ready to go back together. New float bowl gasket, new O-ring on the jet access drain, new jets everywhere. I replaced that screw. I replaced the screw underneath there that holds in the intake assembly, and basically we're all good. And of course, I only seem to have 2 of these cap head screws where I should have 3. There's got to be one around here somewhere, so I got to look for that. And now I'm noticing that once I put that cap back on, the inside of that is dirty. So I'm going to clean that up too before I put it back on the bike. All right, and after all that, here we are, carburetor back on the bike. Of course, all new vent hoses, because you're not going to put those old crappy ones back on there. All the engine bolts Loctited, torqued, new, cleaned up the Boyson rad valve, new gasket. That is good to go. We still have to clean up the slide and put that back in place with the new throttle cable. Here's the carburetor parts that I've replaced. Bike was jetted leaner to begin with. Right now I've got stock jetting. We'll see how it goes. If I have to lean it out a little bit, I've got the next two sizes down. And other than that, we are getting there. It will not be long before this thing is ready to rip. All right, guys, and so ends another episode. We're close, man. This thing is really coming along. And I'm guessing by the time we're done, it's going to warm up a little bit here, and we're going to take this thing out and tear it up. I can't wait to see how good it goes. I think next time we're going to rebuild the shock. We're going to put the rest of the electrical back on the bike. We've got to tighten up the what's left of the subframe and the airbox, but all of that stuff is in pretty good shape. So it won't be long before we're ready to go. That being said, thank you everybody for watching. If you've got any questions or suggestions, drop them in the comments below. And if you're enjoying my content, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. Other than that, thank you, and we'll see you soon.